Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm going to be talking about Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. This is part of my series of reviews where I'm rewatching and reviewing every single live-action Star Wars film. I am actually going to touch on the Clone Wars animated film, but I decided when I'm going to do that, I'm going to talk about the rest of the Clone Wars series, so I made a change there. So I made a slight change there. But with The Force Awakens, this was the first Star Wars film that I saw in theaters, but it's also the only Disney film it's also the only Disney-era Star Wars film I have not reviewed on my channel yet, so this is special in two regards. But yes, this film has a certain nostalgia for me because I got to see this in theaters, first time I ever got to see any Star Wars film in theaters, therefore it will hold a special place in my heart. That giddy feeling of watching The Crawl on the big screen for the very first time. There's just that experience of seeing it in the theater that I've not experienced with any of the Star Wars films that came out before it. And yes, I did get to experience that with the subsequent ones as well, but not to the same extent because there's something special about the first time. And I kind of wish I was doing YouTube when The Force Awakens came out, because then I could have had more an authentic reaction back then made for posterity. But unfortunately, I did not do that. But hey, I'm doing it now. I'm talking about the film now. Now, we also need to address the elephant in the room. That being, people hate the sequels. People also hated the prequels. I wonder, do people hate the originals too? Because that just seems like a common Star Wars fan thing to hate whatever the current Star Wars thing is. But yes, there is a lot of sequel hate, and I think a lot of it is unfounded. Now, I'll be talking about the other two sequel films later on when I talk about them individually, then when I do my sequel trilogy as a whole review. But specifically with The Force Awakens, I like it. I loved it. I think it was a great reintroduction to the Star Wars franchise. I also think it did a really good job at introducing us to our characters. Han is himself, which makes sense because, honestly, old Han Solo and old Indiana Jones seem like very much the same character. I guess that's the kind of character that Harrison Ford plays best nowadays, if I had to wager, I guess. But yeah, he's grumpy, but he also fills the place of the mentor for our new generation of heroes in this story. Basically the same position that Ben Kenobi had in A New Hope, and even Qui-Gon to a certain extent in The Phantom Menace. And like the mentor, he does not live to see the end of the film. I actually remember about a month or so after I saw The Force Awakens in theaters, I was at a lock-in for my church's youth group, and me and one of my friends there, we reenacted that scene. We just started doing it. No obvious communication. We just started doing it. I mean, having fun with Star Wars is a very important thing as well. And I brought this up because I mentioned Han Solo's death scene. But let's actually talk about that death scene because it's a very important scene, and it becomes even more important with The Rise of Skywalker. But in fact, this scene is presented in the film, so I'm not taking the rest of the sequels into context, but it is presented as the last chance for Ben Solo, for Kylo Ren to turn away from the dark side, and he rejects it. That's how the scene was read, I think, when the film was released, and I don't know if that was the intention of the filmmakers, but that's how it was read until later on with the additional context of The Last Jedi, and especially the final scene in The Rise of Skywalker, where this scene is basically redone, but in brighter lighting, and Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, makes the correct choice that time. Which is a really great parallel, and I'll talk more about that when I talk about The Rise of Skywalker. But here in The Force Awakens, he's doubling down on the dark side. And I have this theory that Kylo Ben did not ignite the lightsaber, that Han did it, taking the choice away from his son because he knew his son couldn't make the choice. Which sounds weird, but one, Harrison Ford's been dying to come back to Star Wars only if they let him kill off Han Solo, and he finally succeeded. Plus, I'm sure the money helped as well. But with this scene in context of that and the characterization of Kylo. Kylo couldn't make that decision. He was so torn between his family, the light side, and the Force Order, the dark side, that he literally could not make a choice. So Han Solo made the choice for him to hopefully shock his son into realizing it was the wrong choice. I don't think it quite worked like he intended, but that's a father's love for his son, willing to do anything to try to save his son. In this case, his son from the dark side, not from death, but practically the same thing. Am I right? So there's that there. Also, we got Finn's characterization as well, which is very interesting as well. And that has to do a lot with the fact that he's kind of this film portrayed as a bit of a puppy dog. Basically, he latches on to Poe and Rey the minute he meets them, just like a puppy dog would when meeting someone they sense is a good person. And I don't think that's unintentional. I think that's definitely what they wanted to show. This is an individual who was kidnapped as a child and brainwashed to be the foot soldier of a fascist regime. And when he breaks it away, well, there's going to be some lingering effects, and that could be, a little overly trusting of people who aren't part of the First Order. But I do hate to say it that The Force Awakens was Finn's strongest point as a character in the sequel trilogy. I'll talk more about it, but I do think his introduction was the strongest part of it. And that's actually kind of true of all the films in the sequel trilogy. The Force Awakens is the strongest film because all they had to do was set up a story. They didn't need to conclude a story. They didn't need to finish it. And what does J.J. Abrams does best in his work? Setting things up. He's not the best finisher. That doesn't mean he can't do it. It just means that's not where his storytelling lies. I think I got thoughts about The Rise of Skywalker in that regard, and we'll get to that there. But I just want you to just hear that I think The Force Awakens is the strongest because it only had to set things up. It didn't have to worry about concluding. Therefore, a part 1 could be made super well. The problem is that you have creative disagreements, and that leads to fan disagreements because certain fans like certain interpretations and certain fans didn't like certain interpretations of characters and events and directions to take them. That's a lot to say, but I did need to get that addressed before continuing on to talk about the other characterizations. Leia's perfectly in character, not much for her because this is of the legacy characters Han Solo's film. That's the legacy character we get to see a bunch about. Leia is only secondary, and Luke is tertiary to all that. And Luke will get his spotlight in the next film, and Leia was supposed to get his spotlight in The Rise of Skywalker, which I'll talk about when I talk about The Rise of Skywalker. But there is that said, we got Kylo as well, who is basically a wannabe Vader fanboy. He's a Vader fanboy who wants to be just like Vader, but he's a bit of a dweeb, you could say. He's a bit of not really cut out for what he thinks he wants to do. I think that's a good way of saying it. Basically, Kylo Ren was never supposed to be this intimidating new Vader. He was always supposed to be a Vader wannabe, always in the shadow of Vader, which was the right choice in my opinion. Now, some Star Wars fans, I think, unfortunately missed that intention, but that's why I think the intention was behind Kylo. Like, we know we can't replicate Vader. We can't do that. Even though we're trying to replicate the feel of the original trilogy to a certain extent. But what if we made one of the main villains somebody who admires Vader, who wants to be like Vader, and thus is trying to be like Vader, but because he's not Vader, he's failing at it. I like that, and I think that was very well done in that regard. And that also brings us then to Rey, who is definitely this trilogy's version of Luke Skywalker, but she's different, but the same. Yes, Rey is just like Luke. She's starry-eyed and all that, but unlike Luke, she wants to stay on Jakku. Luke wanted to get off Tatooine. That's the only really fundamental difference between them as they were introduced. Both of them are introduced as good people who care, who want to do the right thing, but they are in different situations. Rey wants to stay on Jakku because she wants her family to come back, and she's afraid that if she leaves Jakku, her family will never find her. While Luke, he had his family. The only thing is that he wanted something more. He wanted something more than just being a moisture farmer. In a way, they both wanted what they didn't have, and that's where the characters fundamentally differ in terms of introduction, is what they have and what they want. Rey has adventure in her life already, but she wants a family, so she wants to avoid adventure. Luke has a family and he wants adventure, but he also has this profound sense of responsibility to his family, therefore he's not going to go on an adventure quite yet. Rey, she's dragged into adventure just like Luke, but it took her longer in her adventure to be, okay, I'm going to stop running from the adventure now. And running from adventure is something that both Finn and Rey are doing in this film. They're running away from their call to action. They're the start of the hero's journey, if you will. And by the end of this film, Rey has fully accepted it, and I think Finn's as well, but we'll talk more about Finn's call to action in that and journey in the adventure in the Last Jedi. And so I think that leaves Poe Dameron, who we got some great scenes with and all that, but unfortunately I think he does kind of lack in character development here. He's just introduced as this hotshot hero of a pilot, and there's not really any character development there to it. But can I say I really do love how basically Finn and Rey interact, and then Finn and Poe interact. I think there's some great character dynamics there, and it's kind of unfortunate that it's not until the Rise of Skywalker that we got to see Rey and Poe interacting. That'd be like if, I don't know, Luke and Leia never interacted in The New Hope. Not quite the same, but it's the same principle of the matter. When two of your main three heroes don't interact, it's kind of a bit weird. One of my few problems with this film is that, and that's honestly a minor thing, because they eventually do rectify that, though that does take some time. So I think that covers most of what I have to say about this film, about the characters. Maybe I should address the fact that Starkiller is basically a Death Star 2.0, just bigger and badder. But I do think that very much fits into the authoritarian fascist MO. It's all about wounded weapons and shows the Force. So, well, the Death Star didn't frighten people into behaving. What if we go bigger and destroy entire systems and destroy stars as we're powering the weapon to destroy systems? That is such, I think, a fascist and authoritarian mentality, in that, well, the smaller scale didn't work, so we have to go bigger. We got to show off more. And people who support such an ideology, that is, might makes right. That's how they would think. Also, if you ever get a chance to listen to General Hux's speech in German, do so, because if you compare it with a certain someone from 1930s Germany, Hux's speech and that person's speech sound the same to my English ears, and I don't think that was a coincidence, and that German voice actor knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing, and that is the right parallel. Basically, think of this. The First Order is, what if the Nazis survived, went into exile in Argentina, and struck back? That's essentially what's going on. Or Antarctica. We can use whatever metaphor that we want from those conspiracy theories. But the point I do want to convey with that, though, is that this film does a good job at showing the First Order and the dangers they possess. The only problem with that is we don't get enough of the New Republic to give better context for why they are a thing. But I very much do like how they're portrayed basically as a terrorist organization, as a paramilitary organization without the real backing of any government or that, so, which I think makes them in some ways more dangerous than the Empire, because the Empire had to keep the veneer of civilization, not quite, the veneer of responsibility. No, basically they didn't. The Empire didn't want to tip their hand too soon, but the First Order had no problem tipping their hand as quickly as they could once they subverted and all that. Seriously, read Bloodlines, you get a hint at how the First Order was subverting the Republic way before this film was set. Resistance, you get a taste of that as well. There's more I can discuss there. I also want to address one more thing about Rey, her piloting abilities. One, she's a scavenger. She's been over ships. She knows how they're generally set up. Two, It's established when they were running to the Falcon that Rey wanted to take a different ship, a quad jumper, which tells me that she had flown a quad jumper before. And while she admits that she had never flown the Falcon because they had not flown for a long time, she knew the things that Uncle Plutt put on the Falcon that Han didn't know. So that means she probably did some maintenance work for him, trying to get some extra portions. I say this because people like to say Rey is a Mary Sue. And in my opinion, she is not. And if you call Rey a Mary Sue, you might as well call Anakin and Luke a Mary Sue as well. Because remember, in Star Wars, the Force is literal plot armor and plot convenience. It's the Force. Once something should happen, it will happen. You know, Anakin blowing up the Trade Federation droid control ship. There's no way a 9-year-old should have been able to do that, even with the Force. Luke destroying the Death Star by making an impossible shot. Yes, the Force was involved, explicitly involved in the text of the story. And I think that's the key thing, is that with Anakin, he's told to be the chosen one, so everything is waved off by the fans. With Luke, when he does something impressive, the text does a very good job at showing to us that the Force is the reason why those impossible things are accomplished. But with Rey, I think maybe the filmmakers thought the audience was smarter than we actually are. Because, yes, it's kind of obvious. Like, in the duel between Ben, and, or I should say Kylo at this point, and Rey, he mentions the Force. She closes her eyes, centers herself, and then gets the upper end on him. That's her reaching into the Force? It seemed pretty obvious to me. I do want to address too with her fighting. I don't think it's supposed to be that posture fighting. It doesn't look that posture to me. And they do though establish in the film back on Jakku that Rey knows how to fight because of the type of environment that she grew up in, just with a staff rather than a lightsaber, but still melee combat. So maybe not everything's one-to-one transferable, but enough where she could not die. And you know what? That's what happened until she tapped into the Force and tapped into the dark side of the Force to get the upper hand on Kylo, who had proper training. And also Finn probably had some melee training as well. Maybe not with the lightsaber, but still. While skills may not be 100% transferable, if you know what to do with one, you could probably figure out what to do with the other. Such as, don't hold the lightsaber blade by your hand. And with her piloting skills, well, one, she's been working scavenging ships all her life, so there's a good chance that she knows how things are set up and that she's seen very different cockpits. Maybe even a few YT-1300s as well. Who knows how many might have ended up in the service of the rebellion. But also we can assume too that she did work on the Falcon because she knew about the things Uncle Plutt installed. How would she knew that if she didn't do maintenance work on the Falcon for Uncle Plutt? And while she did say the Falcon hadn't flown in a while, just doing maintenance work on it means she's vaguely familiar with the systems. And because she originally wanted to take the quad jumper before it was destroyed, tells me she knew that craft as well and perhaps had even flown it. Because remember, she called the Falcon junk. Why does everyone keep calling the Falcon junk? I don't know. But by establishing that for us, the audience, that she saw the Falcon was junk and she wanted a different ship, that means she knew the other ship was likely flight-worthy, therefore she knew how to fly that ship. And in Star Wars, flying is treated like driving a car. If you can fly one thing, you can fly other things. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind as a fandom. So no, I don't think Rey is a Mary Sue. Is she gifted? Is she a prodigy in the Force? Yes. But remember, Star Wars has the Force, which is literal plot armor and plot convenience in Deus Ex Machina. If we're going to talk about Mary Sue's and all that, we got to acknowledge the Force and the role it plays in the franchise since the very first film. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk on that. I might actually cut that into its own separate video, separate from this whole review. But now I want to switch it up and ask you, what did you think of Star Wars The Force Awakens? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.